Are you ready to learn the shocking truth about the invisible people who, with their own hands and sweat, provided the unimaginable luxury of Victorian mansions? If you're also curious to peek behind the glamorous scenes of a beautiful era, give this video a big thumbs up right now and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new investigations. What is actually hidden behind the polished facades of magnificent 19th century British estates is truly mind-boggling and forces us to look at our favorite period dramas in a whole new light. The life of the servants was a harsh, ruthless mechanism for managing a colossal household, one that never stopped for a single second. These people, practically deprived of their own lives, moved through narrow, dark corridors like silent shadows, ensuring impeccable order around the clock in the homes of powerful aristocratic dynasties. Don't switch channels under any circumstances. Watch this video all the way to the end. The finale of this episode will truly shatter your preconceptions. You'll discover the true, sometimes terrifying cost of this meticulously curated lifestyle in England's wealthiest estates and the real sacrifices workers had to make to maintain the illusion of someone else's perfection. Get comfortable, pour yourself some tea. We're about to dive into the secrets of the Victorian era. What if I told you that everything you believed about peaceful sleep in the 19th century is a lie? Nightlife in a Victorian mansion was a world of its own, governed by entirely different rules. While the owners of the house rested in their luxurious bedrooms, the servants continued to carry out their duties. Work did not stop even late at night, as the enormous house required constant attention. The coal stoves needed to be regularly stoked to keep the heat going until morning. This continuous cycle of work ensured the very atmosphere of serenity that aristocratic dynasties took such pride in. Night shifts were strictly assigned to the junior staff according to a schedule. The maids would descend into the dark cellars to fetch fresh coal for the kitchen stoves. Their footsteps on the stone steps had to be absolutely silent. Every movement was perfected through years of practice so that not a single sound would disturb the silence of the upper floors. The junior maids worked by the dim light of tallow candles, which provided minimal illumination. Morning preparations began long before dawn, around 3 o'clock in the morning. At this time, it was necessary to clear all the fireplaces of yesterday's ashes. This task required incredible care so as not to stain the expensive carpets and furniture with soot. The ashes were collected in special metal buckets and carefully carried out to the backyard. Only then could the process of lighting a new fire begin. Water for the master's morning ablutions was also prepared during the night. Huge copper pitchers were filled in the kitchen and placed on special trays. Heating the water took a considerable amount of time, as the stoves were just beginning to heat up. Maids carried the heavy pitchers up the narrow service staircases to the upper floors. This process was repeated dozens of times in a single night for every bedroom in the house. Shoe cleaning was another important nightly duty for the servants. Dozens of pairs of men's boots and women's shoes were lined up in a special room. The servants used various brushes and polish to give the leather a perfect shine. Each pair had to look brand new by the time the owners woke up. Polishing the shoes to a shine took several hours of continuous, monotonous labor. Preparing the dining room for breakfast began immediately after midnight. Huge dining tables were rubbed with beeswax until they were mirror smooth. Chairs were arranged in strict rows, maintaining the perfect geometry of the space. Silverware was polished with special compounds, removing the slightest traces of tarnish. Every fork and spoon occupied its strictly designated place on the snow-white tablecloth. Caring for the wardrobe also required the staff's overnight attention. The host's dresses and suits had to be cleaned of street dust. The fabrics were carefully smoothed out with heavy irons heated on the kitchen stove. The pleats on the skirts were reshaped using special starch solutions. By morning, all the clothes had to hang in perfect condition in the dressing rooms. The window panes on the ground floors were cleaned in the early hours of the morning. Servants used newspapers and a vinegar solution to remove stains. This work required caution so as not to wake the sleeping residents with the creaking of window frames. Spotlessly clean windows were considered a sign of a family's status and wealth. The first rays of the sun were to shine unobstructed into the luxurious living rooms. Corridors and halls were swept in a special way, using damp tea leaves. The leaves were scattered over the carpets so they would absorb dust and refresh the fabric's colors. Then they were carefully gathered with stiff brushes without raising a cloud of dust. This method allowed for maintaining cleanliness without the use of noisy devices. In the morning, the owners saw only impeccably clean floors without a single speck of dust. This rhythm of life turned the servants into an invisible mechanism for ensuring comfort. Their labor went unnoticed as long as everything functioned without a hitch. It would be very interesting to hear your thoughts on this way of life. What do you think about such exhausting night work for the sake of someone else's comfort? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel to learn more hidden historical facts.
I'm so tired.
What I'm about to show you is banned in 12 countries, but this is exactly how the truth about kitchen hierarchies was hidden for years. The Victorian kitchen was a strictly organized system with a rigid hierarchy. At the head of this kingdom always stood the head chef or head cook. Absolutely all kitchen staff obeyed this person unquestioningly. Junior staff didn't even have the right to speak directly to the head chef. Communication took place through a system of senior assistants and sous chefs. Kitchen maids were at the very bottom of this food chain. Their workday consisted of endlessly washing huge copper pots and pans. They had to carry buckets of water from street hydrants to do the washing. The cold water was mixed with harsh soap, which severely dried out the skin on their hands. This monotonous work took up most of the young women's time. Cooking for an aristocratic family required a huge amount of ingredients. Fresh vegetables were delivered to the kitchen daily and had to be peeled and chopped. Specialized workers were tasked exclusively with preparing root vegetables for complex dishes. Mountains of potatoes and carrots were peeled by hand using simple knives. The food preparation process never stopped for a single minute. Food storage was a separate and complex logistical challenge. Refrigerators did not exist, so deep ice cellars in the basements were used. Chunks of ice were delivered by special merchants early in the morning. Servants carried the heavy blocks of ice and placed them in special niches. The food was arranged on shelves in strict order to preserve its freshness. The process of baking bread began late in the evening of the previous day. The dough was kneaded in huge wooden troughs by strong male hands. It had to rise all night in a warm room near the ovens. In the morning, loaves were shaped and sent into the red-hot ovens. Fresh bread was an essential part of breakfast in any self-respecting household. The hierarchy of the servants' dynasty was strictly observed even during their own meals. The head servants dined in a separate room at a large table. They were entitled to higher quality ingredients and exquisite dishes. The junior staff ate the leftovers from the master's meal right in the kitchen in a hurry. This underscored the social divide even within the household staff. The kitchen stoves were coal-fired and required constant temperature monitoring. The cooks gauged the heat simply by holding their hand up to the cast iron surface. Temperature control was achieved by opening and closing special dampers. Maintaining an even flame was considered a true art, not accessible to everyone. The quality of all the prepared delicacies depended on this. The dishwashing room was located next to the kitchen and was always filled with steam. Here, the delicate porcelain and crystal used in the dining room were washed. This task was entrusted only to experienced maids with very dexterous hands. A broken plate could cost a maid her monthly salary. Therefore, every movement in the china room was as careful as possible. Creating elaborate desserts required a separate room and special tools. Pastry chefs used copper molds for jellies and puddings. Whipping cream was done by hand using special wire whisks. This process could take several hours of continuous work. The finished desserts were true works of culinary art. Managing such a complex kitchen operation required incredible discipline and a clear division of responsibilities. Every cog in this mechanism knew its place and never overstepped its bounds. I wonder how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world. Where you come from, and whether you agree that such a strict hierarchy was truly necessary. Share your thoughts in the comments, because every opinion is valuable. In the next chapter, I will reveal the best-kept secret about exactly how servants moved around the house unnoticed. I will reveal the best-kept secret that will forever change your perception of the layout of luxurious palaces. Victorian mansions were designed with one key architectural feature in mind. The owners wanted impeccable service, but they absolutely did not want to see the servants themselves. To achieve this, a parallel system of secret corridors and hidden staircases was created. They ran through the entire house like blood vessels, remaining invisible to guests. Servants moved through these narrow passages with incredible speed. The doors to these secret rooms were disguised as bookcases or wooden panels. A maid could literally appear from the wall at the first ring of a bell. Such a layout demanded incredible precision and ingenuity from the architects. Special acoustic tubes were laid inside the walls to transmit voice commands. It was a kind of 19th century internal telephone. Narrow service staircases were built with very steep steps to save space. Climbing them with heavy trays or buckets was extremely difficult. The maids had to balance on narrow wooden planks while wearing long skirts. These staircases lacked proper lighting, so that light would not shine into the master's quarters. Movement was practically done by touch, relying on muscle memory. The bell system was a complex mechanism of wires and bells. Each bell in the servants' quarters had its own unique tone. By the sound, the servants could unerringly determine exactly which room required their presence. The wires ran through all the floors and required regular lubrication and inspection. This system ensured an immediate response from the staff to any request from the aristocrats. Servants were strictly forbidden from using the grand staircases unless absolutely necessary. The appearance of a maid with a bucket in the main hall was considered a serious offense. If a servant happened to encounter the master in the hallway, he was required to turn his back to the wall. This gesture symbolized the invisibility and submissiveness of the staff. Eye contact with aristocrats was strictly forbidden by the rules of etiquette. The basement housed not only kitchens, but also recreation rooms. These spaces lacked natural light and proper ventilation. The air there was always stuffy and damp due to the proximity of the laundry rooms. The stone floors were covered with a thin layer of straw or cheap mats. It was under these conditions that the entire private life of the mansion's working class took place. Movement throughout the house was governed by a strict schedule to avoid collisions. The living rooms were cleaned exclusively while the owners were in the park. If the aristocrats' plans suddenly changed, the servants had to vanish instantly along with their equipment. The maids literally disappeared through secret doors, leaving behind only cleanliness. Speed and discretion were valued above all else. The windows of the servants' quarters were often painted white on the inside. This was done so that the servants could not watch the owners as they walked by. It also hid the unattractive appearance of the workrooms from view from the street. The servants' world was completely isolated from the outside by the mansion's walls. They existed in their own architectural dimension. Coal and firewood were delivered to the upper floors via special hidden elevators. These were wooden platforms operated by hand, raised using ropes. Servants turned heavy wheels in the basement to deliver fuel to the bedrooms. The mechanisms creaked regularly, so they were carefully lubricated with animal fats. Using these lifts required considerable physical strength. The mansion's architecture shaped not only the space but also the behavior of the people inside it. Spatial segregation highlighted class differences better than any words could. The dark corridors remained silent witnesses to the endless labor of the domestic staff. If you enjoyed this unique information about secret passages, be sure to like this video. Your support helps us create even more high-quality historical content. Want to know a secret that will make you truly appreciate modern conveniences? Heating a huge stone house required an unimaginable amount of fuel. Dozens of sacks of select coal were delivered to the mansion every day. Fireplaces burned in nearly every room from early fall to late spring. Coal was the only source of heat capable of withstanding the damp English climate. Keeping the fires going became a continuous and arduous task for the junior servants. The process of lighting the fire began with preparing special kindling. Dry branches and wood chips were carefully arranged on the metal grate of the fireplace. Large pieces of coal were placed on top, maintaining specific proportions to ensure good draft. Maids used old newspapers, rolling them into tight bundles. How quickly the room filled with warmth depended on the proper arrangement. Cleaning the fireplaces was the dirtiest and most thankless job in the house. Soot got everywhere, settling on the maids' faces, hair, and uniforms. Ash was swept into metal dustpans using special brushes with stiff bristles. The fireplace grates were rubbed with lead powder until they shone with a black mirror-like sheen. This procedure was repeated daily before adding a new batch of coal. Carrying coal up the floors was an exhausting task requiring tremendous stamina. Metal buckets filled with black stones weighed several dozen kilograms. The maids carried them up narrow, hidden staircases to the upper floors. The handles of the buckets left deep marks on their palms, even through thick gloves. The entire journey took a long time and required a tremendous amount of strength. Smoke from the fireplaces often blew back into the rooms due to strong gusts of wind. The servants had to quickly air out the rooms by opening the heavy wooden window frames. The smell of smoke permeated the curtains and carpets, requiring constant cleaning and maintenance. Drafts swept through the vast halls, making the servants' work even less comfortable. Despite all efforts, there was always a faint scent of coal smoke in the houses. Coal was stored in massive underground bunkers beneath the house. Specialized workers loaded the fuel through hatches in the sidewalk directly from the street. Inside the bunkers, it was pitch black, and thick coal dust hung in the air. Junior servants would go down there with lanterns to fill buckets. Moving around the slippery piles of coal was extremely awkward and physically demanding. The ash wasn't simply thrown away, but used for various household purposes. Carefully sifted ash was used for washing floors and laundering coarse fabrics. It had excellent cleaning properties and helped remove stubborn grease stains. The ash was collected in large wooden barrels in the estate's backyard. Waste-free production was the norm, even in the wealthiest aristocratic homes. Mantelpieces and marble portals required special, careful maintenance. They were wiped down with soft flannel cloths using special wax polishes. Any soot stain on white marble was considered an unacceptable oversight on the part of the maid. Elegant clocks and figurines on the shelves were dusted with small feather dusters. The fireplace was the visual centerpiece of the room and had to look impeccable. The winter months turned the servants' lives into a real test of endurance. Coal consumption increased many times over, and with it, the workload grew. Daylight hours were short, so most of the time they had to work by candlelight. Firewood consumption for kitchen stoves also reached its annual peak. The constant cold in the servants' hallways forced them to move faster to stay warm. Coal dust settled continuously on every surface, making cleaning a truly endless process. The maid's labor resembled Sisyphus's toil, where the results vanished after just a few hours. Every room required daily attention and care from the staff. Have you ever wondered how many tons of coal a single mansion burned during a long winter? In the next chapter, you'll learn how the layout of these vast spaces was organized and how the servants found their way through the countless corridors. The layout of a Victorian mansion was a complex, multi-level system of rooms. The lower levels were entirely devoted to the needs of the staff and storage areas. The first floor housed the formal reception rooms for high-ranking guests. The second floor contained the owner's private quarters and luxurious bedrooms. The top floors, often under the roof itself, served as quarters for the junior servants. The kitchen was always located in the basement or in a remote wing of the building. This arrangement prevented food odors from entering the mansion's main reception rooms. Long corridors connected the kitchen to the dining room on the first floor via special serving halls. These serving halls served as a transition zone where dishes were plated before being served. The logistics of transporting food were calculated down to the second so that the dishes would not get cold. Laundry rooms were also kept away from living quarters due to steam and dampness. Huge boilers for washing clothes stood in rooms with stone floors. Moisture condensed on the walls, so a good ventilation system was required. Special ironing rooms with wide tables were set up next to the laundry rooms. The entire process of caring for textiles was hidden from prying eyes. The library was considered a strictly masculine space in the home of a Victorian gentleman. Men would retreat here after dinner to smoke cigars and discuss business matters. The walls were paneled with dark wood, and massive shelves were lined with leather-bound books. Cleaning the library was entrusted only to the most experienced and meticulous servants. Dust was removed from the books with extreme care, taking care not to damage the valuable volumes. The morning rooms were intended exclusively for the women of the family. They were located on the sunny side of the building and decorated in light colors. Here, the ladies wrote letters, did needlework, and entertained close friends. The furniture in these rooms was lighter and more elegant than in the staterooms. Maids kept these rooms in perfect order, constantly refreshing the floral arrangements. The butler's room served as a sort of command center for the entire house. It housed the keys to the wine cellars and the most valuable tableware. The butler kept accounting records here and assigned duties to the staff. This room was situated so as to monitor all entrances and exits from the mansion. No stranger could enter the house without the butler's knowledge. The dressing rooms were impressive in their size and abundance of mahogany wardrobes. They adjoined the owner's bedrooms and served as a place for daily changes of clothes. Clothing was stored in special covers that protected delicate fabrics from dust and moths. Hat boxes and shoe racks took up entire walls from floor to ceiling. Personal valets spent hours here preparing outfits for the next outing. Greenhouses and winter gardens were attached to the mansions to display exotic plants. Maintaining the proper temperature and humidity under the glass roofs required constant effort. Gardeners continuously watered the palm trees and ferns brought from distant colonies. The glass panels were washed regularly to ensure maximum sunlight penetration. These green oases served as a place for leisurely strolls in bad weather. Children's rooms were always located on the upper floors, away from the formal rooms. This was done to ensure that the noise from the children's games did not disturb the adults living in the house. The space was divided into a play area, a study, and bedrooms. Nannies and governesses lived there as well, exercising complete control over the lives of the children in their care. Access to this part of the house was strictly restricted, even for other members of the staff. A system of back entrances allowed merchants to deliver goods completely unnoticed. Food, ice, and coal were brought in through separate doors in the inner courtyard. Merchants never crossed paths with the house's owners or their high-ranking guests. This ensured the complete illusion that the house functioned on its own. The mansion was a perfectly balanced ecosystem with clear zoning. Guess what happened next when high fashion standards collided with hard daily labor? A Victorian maid's uniform was not just clothing, but a symbol of her status. The austere black dress and snow-white apron became the hallmark of the era. Fabrics were chosen to be thick and practical, capable of withstanding frequent daily washings. The length of the skirt was strictly regulated and had to cover the ankles. Any deviation from the established dress code was considered a gross violation of internal discipline. An important detail of the women's uniform of that time was a tightly laced corset. Even maids were required to wear this garment while working. The corset ensured proper posture, which was required of the service staff. Lacing it up became a daily morning ritual in the cramped servants' quarters. Movements in such attire became measured and smooth, in keeping with the house's etiquette. Stiffened collars and cuffs gave the uniform a special air of freshness and cleanliness. Starching was a complex process requiring precise adherence to proportions. The garment parts were dipped into a hot starch solution and then ironed with a heavy iron. The collars became so stiff that they resembled snow-white, thick cardboard. The housekeeper checked the whiteness of these items every morning before the start of the workday. Maids' caps varied in shape depending on their rank. Junior maids wore simple, smooth bonnets made of inexpensive white cotton. The bonnets of senior maids were adorned with delicate lace and intricate pleats. This headwear reliably concealed the hair, preventing it from accidentally falling onto the furniture. Removing the bonnet while working was considered an utterly unthinkable and audacious act. The servants' footwear was incredibly practical and completely devoid of decoration. Black leather boots with low heels provided stability on slippery floors. The soles were lined with soft materials to ensure that footsteps remained completely silent. Cleaning one's own shoes was part of every servant's daily duties. The appearance of the boots was carefully inspected along with the rest of the uniform. The men's footmen's uniforms were tailored from expensive fabrics to individual measurements. The liveries were often adorned with coat of arms buttons and rich gold embroidery. The colors of the uniform strictly corresponded to the heraldic colors of the aristocratic dynasty. Footmen in bright liveries served as a kind of decoration for the mansion's ceremonial halls. Their clothing cost a fortune and was stored in wardrobes with particular care. The butler always wore a formal black suit, reminiscent of a gentleman's attire. A snow-white shirt and black tie emphasized his high status among the staff. The butler's appearance commanded respect and symbolized absolute order in the house. The fabrics for his suits were ordered from the best tailors in the big city. He was the face of the household and had to look impeccable in any situation. Washing and mending the uniforms took up all the junior staff's free time. Stains from coal, wax, and food had to be washed out immediately. Torn aprons were carefully sewn up with small stitches, almost invisible to the eye. Each servant was issued a strictly limited number of sets of work clothes. Therefore, keeping the uniform clean required incredible care while performing duties. Wearing tight clothing and corsets affected the entire ergonomics of the work process. They had to bend down for fallen objects with a perfectly straight, unyielding back. Cleaning the lower tiers of furniture turned into a complex, precise gymnastic exercise. The servants developed special movement techniques to perform their work as efficiently as possible. Their movements were characterized by restraint, dictated by the rigid constraints of their heavy work uniforms. Uniforms erased individuality, turning living people into silent functions. They served as a constant reminder of the strict hierarchy within the vast estate. Do you think a strict dress code affects the efficiency of modern workers? In the next chapter, we will examine in detail how the most complex rituals took place in the main dining hall. Setting the dining table was an art form with a multitude of strict rules. The butler personally oversaw this process, measuring distances with a special wooden ruler. Perfect proportions had to be maintained between the plates, forks, and crystal glasses. The slightest asymmetry was considered a sign of bad taste and unprofessionalism on the part of the servants. The table was set for several dozen people a few hours before the start of the celebration. Snow-white tablecloths were laid in a specific manner to avoid any unevenness. A soft flannel cloth was placed under the main tablecloth to protect the valuable tabletop. The folds in the linen fabric were meant to form a strict geometric pattern. The table surface was smoothed with special irons just before the cutlery was set out. The whiteness of the fabric emphasized the purity and opulence of the aristocratic home. The choice of crystal depended on the menu and the number of collectible wines being served. Each drink was served in a glass of a strictly defined shape and volume. The glasses were arranged in perfect diagonal lines to the right of the guest plate. The crystal was polished until it gleamed, using special lint-free linen napkins. In the light of the candelabras, the glass sparkled, creating a unique atmosphere of an evening celebration. Dishes were served according to the French or Russian system of formal service. Under the Russian system, footmen carried trays of food around the table, offering portions to each guest individually. This required incredible dexterity to avoid bumping into the people seated at the table. The trays of food were held at shoulder level with one steady hand. The footmen's movements resembled a well-rehearsed dance performed in complete silence. The changing of courses took place completely unnoticed by the aristocrats dining at the table. As soon as a guest set down their cutlery, the plate instantly vanished from the table. The footmen communicated with one another exclusively through glances and slight nods of the head. Loud conversations among the serving staff in the dining room were strictly forbidden. Guests were not supposed to notice the work process, enjoying only its superb result. Each dish required the use of special, intricately shaped cutlery. There were separate, elegant forks for oysters, fish, meat, and various desserts. Butlers were required to know the purpose of every silver item on the table without fail. A mistake in serving the cutlery could seriously damage the reputation of the entire household. The silver was brought to the table gleaming, without the slightest trace of tarnish or oxidation. The dining room was lit by enormous multi-tiered crystal chandeliers. Hundreds of candles were lit using special long wooden poles. Wax was not allowed to drip onto the table or the expensive clothing of the guests seated below. Only expensive beeswax candles that did not smoke were used. The even light highlighted the sparkle of the ladies' jewels and the whiteness of the starched tablecloths. The dinner menu was printed on elegant cards with delicate gold embossing. The cards were placed in front of each guest on small silver stands. The names of the dishes were traditionally written in French in beautiful calligraphic handwriting. Compiling the menu was the prerogative of the lady of the house and the head chef. The number of courses could reach 10 or 15 over the course of a single long evening. Decorating the table with flowers was the responsibility of the head housekeeper or an experienced gardener. Centerpieces of fresh roses and orchids were arranged in silver vases. The height of the bouquets was calculated so as not to block the view of one's neighbors. The scent of the flowers was not to overpower the aromas of the exquisite culinary dishes. The floral arrangements changed daily depending on the season and the occasion. Cleaning the dining room after dinner took several hours late into the night. Footmen carefully collected the dirty dishes and carried them to the dishwashing room. Tablecloths were removed and crumbs were swept up with special curved soft brushes. Chairs were arranged in their places, and the burned-out candles in the candelabras were replaced with new ones. By morning, the huge room looked once again as if no one had ever used it. Maintaining cleanliness in the vast building required industrial-scale, meticulous organization. Every day, dozens of maids went to battle against the settling dust and dirt. Each girl had her own clearly defined work area and a strict schedule. Various brushes, rags, buckets, and natural cleaning agents were used for cleaning. Cleaning techniques were passed down from senior maids to junior ones as highly valued knowledge. Wooden floors were scrubbed on one's knees using stiff brushes. Maids used a mixture of sand and soap to whiten unpainted planks. The water in the buckets had to be changed very frequently, carrying it up from the lower floors. The surface was rubbed with beeswax to give the wood a noble matte sheen. This heavy, routine work demanded enormous physical effort from the entire staff. Carpet care was a separate, complex procedure in the busy cleaning schedule. Vacuum cleaners did not exist, so carpets were cleaned by hand using damp cloths. Once a year, the large carpets were taken out into the courtyard for thorough beating. They were thrown over sturdy ropes and beaten with special woven beaters. Dust rose in a thick cloud, so this work was done early in the morning in dry weather. Copper and brass surfaces were cleaned using fresh lemon juice. Door handles, heavy candlesticks, and window latches had to shine like gold. Maids rubbed the metal with a soft cloth until a perfect mirror-like shine appeared. From contact with cleaning acids, the skin on the girl's hands became very rough. The shine of the door handles was considered the hallmark of a good and responsible housewife. Windows were cleaned using vinegar solutions and old crumpled newspapers. The newspaper effectively removed streaks and polished the glass to a crystal clear shine. Cleaning windows on the upper floors carried a constant risk of falling. Maids had to balance on tall wooden stepladders without any safety equipment. Clean windows provided maximum natural light in dark English homes. Caring for upholstered furniture required delicacy and knowledge of the properties of various fabrics. Velvet and silk were dusted very carefully with soft feather dusters. Stains were removed using purified gasoline or concentrated alcohol solutions. Mahogany chair frames were polished with special oils, according to carpenters' recipes. Furniture cost a fortune, so preserving it was the top priority. Washing the linens took several days a week in a huge laundry room. Huge sheets were boiled in copper vats with the addition of lye soap. They were then passed through heavy wooden rollers to wring out excess water. Drying took place on lines strung up in the open-air courtyard. The scent of freshly laundered linen was considered a hallmark of the ideal Victorian home. The ironing process was carried out using heavy cast-iron irons heated on a hot stove. The irons cooled quickly, so the laundresses had to constantly replace them. The process of ironing tablecloths and sheets required the participation of several strong young women at once. The fabric was pulled taut from both sides to avoid accidental, unsightly creases. Work in the ironing room was extremely hot and exhausting due to the thick steam. Insects in old houses were controlled using various herbal mixtures. Small bags of dried lavender and rosemary were placed in wooden wardrobes to repel moths. Wormwood and chamomile were scattered under rugs to deter small pests. Pungent herbal scents filled pantries and linen closets year-round. These natural methods helped preserve delicate fabrics for decades. The owner's private bedrooms were cleaned only when they were completely absent. Maids changed the water in the jugs, made the beds, and aired out the rooms. All items were arranged strictly in their designated places on elegant dressing tables. Beds were made so that the soft feather beds looked plump and perfectly even. The process of tidying up became a continuous whirlwind of daily domestic rituals. The lives of the service staff were governed by strict rules of internal economic order. The servants' wages were modest, but they included full room and board. For many who came from poor families, this was a huge advantage. Servants were issued uniforms, which also saved their meager personal funds. They sent part of their earnings to their families in distant villages. Personal savings were kept in wooden chests right under the beds. Bank accounts were inaccessible to members of the lower working classes. Maids saved money for years, hoping to accumulate a dowry for a future wedding. Butlers and senior housekeepers could afford to build up more substantial financial reserves. Sometimes grateful employers left small sums to their loyal servants in their wills. Meals for the servants were strictly scheduled and served in a separate communal dining room. The diet was simple but filling, plenty of bread, potatoes, and inexpensive meat. Cooks prepared separate meals for the staff in large cast-iron pots. Tea was rationed strictly, as it was considered a rather expensive commodity. Strict hierarchy was observed at the table, depending on a person's position. Tips from the house's guests were an important source of income for senior staff. Upon departure, wealthy guests would leave money with the butler to be distributed among the servants. These funds were divided according to the hierarchy. The senior footmen took the lion's share. Junior maids and kitchen staff rarely received any of these sums. This system created internal competition and encouraged particular diligence in their work. The servants' free time was extremely limited by the terms of their signed employment contract. A day off was granted only once every 2 or 3 long weeks. On this day, the maids were allowed to leave the mansion and visit their relatives. They were required to return before dark so as not to violate strict moral standards. Fines were imposed for tardiness, which were deducted from their meager monthly wages. Reading was considered one of the main pastimes during the rare hours of nightly rest. Servants exchanged cheap pulp novels and old newspapers their employers had already read. The mansion's libraries were off limits to them, so they treasured and reread the books they had access to. Literacy among the servants gradually increased throughout the 19th century. The ability to read and write well offered hope for a quick promotion. Relationships among the servants were strictly regulated by the rules of communal living in the house. Marriages between employees of the same mansion were almost always categorically disapproved of by the owners. A pregnant maid was subject to immediate dismissal without being provided a letter of recommendation. The reputation of the household took precedence over the personal fates of the people who worked there every day. Therefore, any romantic relationships were concealed with incredible care and extreme caution. A servant's illness posed a serious financial problem for the servant himself. Employers rarely paid for medical care for members of the domestic staff. A sick worker might be sent to a poorhouse or simply fired. Therefore, servants hid minor ailments and continued to work tirelessly until the very end. Health and stamina were their main professional assets in this life. Letters of recommendation played a decisive role in the career of any Victorian servant. Without a good recommendation from a previous employer, it was impossible to find decent work. This document described in detail a person's honesty, absolute sobriety, and diligence. The threat of receiving a poor reference forced servants to endure the harshest working conditions. A recommendation served as a sort of passport to the world of well-paid domestic service. Being dismissed from a senior position in a wealthy household was considered a true tragedy. Finding a comparable position with a high salary was an incredibly difficult life challenge. That is why many butlers and housekeepers served one family loyally for decades. They grew old alongside their employers, becoming an integral part of the vast estate. Their lives were completely absorbed into the household economy and the unceasing rhythm of a home that was not their own. The main task of the entire household staff was to maintain the illusion of a perfect, carefree life. The masters were not supposed to see dirt, fatigue, or minor technical glitches. The mansion functioned as a theatrical stage, where the aristocrats were the principal audience. The servants played the role of invisible set designers, silently changing the scenery between acts of the play. Any mistake destroyed this carefully constructed atmosphere of utterly carefree wealth. Silence in the house was maintained with the rigor of a strict, almost religious cult. Heavy wooden doors were lined with felt so they would close completely soundless. Carpets muffled footsteps, and thick brick walls absorbed any voices from the cellars. Conversations in the hallways were conducted exclusively in whispers so as not to disturb the master's peace. The soundproofing created a sense of complete isolation from the bustling outside world. The perfection of daily life demanded constantly anticipating the slightest wishes of the house's owners. A footman had to present a coat a second before a gentleman turned around. The copper teapot on the stove was always ready to boil at a moment's notice. Fresh morning newspapers were ironed so that the printing ink would not stain one's hands. This level of service bordered on mind reading and required the utmost concentration. Invisible spatial boundaries divided the house into zones of absolute dominion and subordination. Servants were permitted to cross these boundaries only when strictly necessary for work. The aristocrats, for their part, never descended into the dark working cellars of the estate. Two worlds existed in parallel under one roof, touching only functionally. This spatial division provided psychological comfort to both distant social groups. Creating a festive atmosphere during social receptions required a colossal effort. The staff spent weeks preparing for the ball, polishing the crystal and waxing the floors. During the event itself, the exhausted servants worked around the clock without a break. After the last guest had left, an exhausting general cleaning of all the rooms began. The illusion of an effortless existence was achieved at the cost of incredible physical exhaustion for the unseen workers. The servants' behavior in public was marked by absolute restraint and complete impassivity. The footmen's faces showed not a single emotion during a lavish dinner. They were trained not to react to jokes, casual arguments, or the anger of their masters. Emotional detachment was considered the highest manifestation of professionalism for a good domestic worker. They became living pieces of furniture with a set of very useful functions. Training young staff in the rules of etiquette took months of rigorous daily practice. Senior servants severely punished newcomers for the slightest lapse in manners. The correct bow, perfect posture, and even tone of voice were drilled daily until they became second nature. Country girls were molded into ideal Victorian maids according to a strict, predetermined template. The transformation process erased past habits, replacing them with a strict professional code. Keeping the household secrets was an unspoken duty of every servant, without exception. The servants witnessed their employers in moments of weakness, family quarrels, or financial difficulties. However, all employees were strictly forbidden from taking this information outside the mansion. Gossipy servants were immediately fired without the right to return to domestic service. Loyalty to the family was valued just as highly as the ability to polish silver. The aesthetics of everyday life in the Victorian era were built on perfect order in everything. Every book in the vast library stood in its place with millimeter precision. Firewood in the fireplace was arranged into beautiful geometric patterns before the evening fire was lit. Curtains were draped in symmetrical folds using special hidden metal pins. The visual perfection of the surrounding world soothed the minds of the estate's wealthy owners. This system collapsed only with the advent of a new era and the transformation of society. However, the phenomenon of Victorian domestic staff has forever remained in history as a symbol of the era. The labor of thousands of people ensured the grandeur of that time, while constantly remaining behind the scenes. The mechanism of the ideal home functioned only thanks to their daily, silent efforts. The memory of these people is hidden in every ancient brick of British mansions. We've only scratched the surface of the complex lives of 19th century domestic staff. Behind the facades of opulent mansions lay entire worlds filled with hard labor and strict rules. These unseen people created the very luxury we admire in historical films. Please let us know in the comments what other topics from everyday life you'd like to see in our next videos. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new, fascinating investigations into the mysteries of the past.